Hello, everybody, and welcome. I am extremely excited for this discussion, not just because we have a wonderful group of panelists, but because as the largest minority group in the US, we deserve to be celebrated. We deserve to show up as our authentic selves in the workplace, in our friend groups, and just our day-to-day lives. So growing up half Spanish, half white, my experience is quite different from my Spanish father's experience in the US, as well as our panelists here. So I'm really excited for all of us to come together and share those differences, as well as celebrate the similarities that we share in our sangre latina, or our Latin blood. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to our panelists, John, Lauren, and Cisco, who will now introduce themselves. So if John, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. John Staines. I am an HR executive for over 35 years with Fortune 100 companies, as well as startups, tech startups, and mid-sized companies. I have been a DE&I champion for many years, being Hispanic. My wife is Asian. And so I've always believed in being inclusive, and I want to create a better work environment for my kids and others. So that's the passion that drives me every day.
Love that. Thank you, John, for being here. And Lauren, can we hear from you?
Yes, I'm Lauren Shumate. I've been many years a sales and marketing executive. I'm also an advisory board member for St. Jude Children's Hospital. I was born in Spain, in Madrid, and come from a family where my father's side of the family is from Buenos Aires, Argentina. My father came to this country because he won on a game show. And he was afforded the money to give it to his sister and bring the rest of my immediate family to the States. My mother was American, but lived in Spain with my father where I was born. And so I grew up in a bilingual home. And I identify and have a lot of passion for my culture. And through the years have really found a place and a voice in helping to mentor Latino individuals in the corporate world. So I do a lot of mentoring with college students and young professionals to help them find a voice and help them find exclusivity. So I'm really very passionate about this topic and really feel very grateful to be here and share our culture with you.
Thank you for being here. And Cisco, can you kick us off?
Yes, my name is Cisco Herrera. My first name is Francisco, but I go by Cisco. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel, TSG. I'm honored to be here. I was born in Colombia, South America. When I was 10 years old, my dad got a job with the United Nations, so we travel mainly in the Middle East, but in between the Middle East and going back to Colombia, we traveled to different countries. As a result, I was able to experience different cultures. I came to the States and went to school. I studied information systems. I've been in the IT space for over 20 years. Had the privilege to work with multinational companies. So I've learned to work with others, not only here in the US, but also overseas. And I love helping others. I think of myself as an ambassador to help others in their careers and come alongside with me. Thank you.
Love that. We are honored to have you here. So I will get us kicked off. So the first topic that I wanted to start with is just identity assumptions that come with being Latino or Hispanic in the US. So there are 33 countries in Latin America, and Latino is an ethnicity of many races, but we often see Hispanic individuals being lumped into one category. So I wanted to open that up as a discussion to our panel to discuss identity assumptions based on physical appearance, based on language, food, stereotypes. So I will open it up to our panelists.
So I'll lean in. I think, especially in a long career, and I neglected to say I was born in Lima, Peru. But in a long career, I've experienced myself, because I have a British name, my father being English. When you come into the conversation and people see you as John Staines, they make certain assumptions. When they find out you're Hispanic, the assumptions change. And yet the individual hasn't changed. I'm exactly the same person, right? And so I have experienced, not positive behavior from CEOs and others, because they make the assumption that, because I'm Hispanic, I must be lazy, I must not be very smart, et cetera, right? So it is painful where you're the one that receives that treatment, but that also drives me to show that, you can be as smart as the next individual. And, it's interesting because those of us that are Hispanic, we know that we work very, very hard. And yet the perception can be that we are lazy, right? Because we may have a more laid back demeanor or have more fun or whatever. People make assumptions.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing up that point, especially with your name. It's interesting how those change so quickly as soon as someone finds out that you're not the white man that they were expecting to come in. Yep. Lauren, I know you were mentioning about physical appearance and some assumptions on that.
Yeah, well, I think Latin America being, 33 countries, we all look different, and also being Hispanic also encompasses numerous different races. And so in my experience, it's especially having one Caucasian parent, is that, people expect Latino to look a certain way. And so, so I always, also it's very difficult to figure out in the world where exactly to fit in. So my Latino friends will call me derogatory names like leche, like milk, or blanquita, little white girl, and make fun. And then Caucasian friends, and living in a corporate world where seemingly is much leadership is of a more of a Caucasian race, and primarily, especially in technology. It often becomes really challenging of where to fit in and be authentic to my culture. And, growing up in a bilingual household with many of the foods that my father grew up eating in Argentina, and having the richness of the culture is very much a part of who I am. And so growing up in my family, I was very different than other kids at school. I did not grow up with a lot of Latino kids, and for me to go home and be speaking Spanish at home was not something that I was embarrassed, but made me feel different, much like kids are always self-conscious, for feeling different. But I think the biggest thing for me was just how people reacted to my father, because they looked at me and my skin color and what I look like, and then they would meet him in his heavy accent, and they would make I saw a lot of judgment on him. There's a lot of prejudice of, just because you speak with an accent doesn't mean that you don't speak English well. And my father spoke English. Actually, my abuela, my grandma, she spoke English. I think she learned English watching Wheel of Fortune, but she learned English. She really worked hard to learn English. And to John's point, like, our culture is so hardworking and has such a tremendous sense of friendship and family, and has such a value on education. And I think Hispanics of every socioeconomic level that has such a value on education and lifting up their family and their community to be the best that they can be. And I think that that's something, when you don't understand the culture, to realize. So
one perspective on that too, I want to add is, as a Hispanic and in an IT world, you interact with a lot of people, especially in the support area. And when you just not have to think of, okay, I'm a Hispanic, they're not. You just do your work as anyone else. So you just go with that mindset of here, I'm here to work, I'm here to do my job. So capture that, that perspective from a Hispanic point of view. Yeah.
And Cisco, you mentioned about how the manuals are all the same, but the manuals that people that maybe English isn't their first language are in English, and that's what you learn from. But still the treatment is not always the same.
That is correct. Yeah. So if you were to travel overseas, many of the IT consultants, or even those who were raised here, in Hispanic families, all of us have learned from the same manuals, from the same IBM or whatever company you've worked with. The technology does not translate all the manuals to different languages. So that's something that you want to keep in perspective when you're interviewing another a candidate or considering a candidate, is that even though they may not express themselves well in English, the knowledge they have, the technical knowledge, is the same or better or same as another English-speaking native.
Absolutely. Thank you for that point. And Lauren, you brought up a great point about your father being treated differently, and I experienced the same. Even in California, that's progressive. It was definitely, I felt almost embarrassed sometimes because of how thick my dad's accent was, or what someone would perceive his accent to be, or if we're speaking in Spanish at the grocery store, getting dirty looks, and still happens to this day. And I think that there's an assumption on speaking Spanish in general, where it's like someone's identity, if they don't speak Spanish, maybe they're Latino, but they don't speak Spanish, it's almost an erasure of their identity, when there's a large reason why a lot of people come to the US and don't teach their children Spanish, because there was a period of time where you were discriminated against if you spoke the language. You got in trouble if you spoke anything other than English in schools. So it is something where there's a large population of Hispanic individuals in the US that don't actually speak Spanish, and we see almost a language discrimination on both sides. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah. My younger siblings don't speak Spanish to the level that I do. And to be honest with you, there are so many levels of fluency in any language. If any of you have taken Spanish in school, I think you can appreciate how difficult it is to truly be fluent. Like, could you be on a bus and make out each individual conversation or a joke in Spanish? Like if you turn it and think about English, for anyone to come to this country from any country to learn English, there's different levels of fluency. And I think that our society needs to applaud the hard work and have so much respect for people who speak English as a second language, no matter what their accent is. And it really pains me to have watched my father and as a child, to watch him and how people would just act like they didn't understand when he, to me, spoke, quite clearly. My father had a colleague that was in Atlanta. And they were friends, but they could never understand each other because they both had accents, because he had a real thick Southern accent and my dad had a really thick accent, being from South America. So they used to fight on who had the more Southern accent of the two. But accents are a really hard thing. I mean, we have them in every country, right? But that, to your point though, Rocky, about this generation, the Americans of immigrants that are not learning Spanish, like a lot of families, immigrants feel a lot of pride to live in this beautiful country. And so they wanted their families to be American. They wanted their families to speak English. And I think we have to take a minute and really think about what that means, because this is the land of opportunity. I mean, my father went from a poor kid in Argentina to becoming a very successful white-collar businessman in this country. I have a lot of pride in that. It came from a lot of hard work, and because we live in the land of opportunity. And so all people want when they come here is to move here to have opportunity for their families.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, to Rocky's point, and I think, yes, we're celebrating Hispanic Month, but it applies to everybody. It applies to Japanese coming to this country. It applies to Chinese or Vietnamese coming to this country. It applies to Greeks coming to this country. I mean, it applies to everybody, right? And you often see generations, especially, probably more in the baby boomer age bracket, where people chose not to speak their native language because they wanted to fit in. They wanted to come to this country. They wanted to fit in. They didn't want to be embarrassed, by speaking a different language, or they were discriminated against if they did. So yes, we can focus on Hispanic culture this month and we can celebrate it, but I think it applies to, immigrants from every country.
Absolutely. And thanks for bringing that up, John. Last point on accents before we move on to the next topic, because I think in recruiting, we come across this a lot where there's, depending on what someone's name looks like, there's a question that follows of how's communication. And I think that there's a way that we can think about that when we're recruiting candidates. How are we looking at communication? Like, if a lot of times we're seeing it as a negative instead of the fact that somebody already speaks 2 languages, that's a leg up from somebody else that doesn't. So that's one thing that I want everyone on the call to keep in mind when you're talking to your clients or you're screening candidates, whatever it may be. Like, keep that in mind when you hear somebody with an accent, instead of just thinking about, oh, well, are they going to appreciate this level of communication? So the next topic is an exciting one. One of the things that I love a lot about just being Hispanic and the communication between people from different countries or different Latino countries is our ability to build relationships and our focus on that. We've talked about that a little bit more, of very family oriented. Even if you're a friend, if you're a close friend, you're already a part of the family. So I wanted to open it up to the panel, and there was a point that a lot of questions came in around the topic of relationship building among Hispanic communities. And John, you specifically made a great point of how do you build relationships with a culture that's big on building relationships. So I wanted to open it up to you first, to see if you can elaborate on that a bit further to kick us off.
Sure, it can be quite intimidating, I guess, when you see a Hispanic family or Hispanic, community, because everybody knows everybody, everybody's friends with everybody. It's to your point, Rocky, it's an extended family, right? So it can be quite intimidating to try to build a relationship into that culture. However, if you think about who they are and who we are as Hispanics, we embrace everybody. Right? We are happy to meet people. We're happy to bring you into the family. We're happy to have a friendship. So I would not be afraid of building a relationship with somebody that's Hispanic, because that's what we love. That's what we love to do. So put yourself out there, park assumptions. That's the biggest barrier, I think, that people have when they make assumptions about a person because of their name or their accent, assumptions about a culture, assumptions about your ability to be able to fit in. If you park assumptions and you extend the hand, you will receive a very warm welcome in the Hispanic community.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add, in the IT world, the world is getting smaller, meaning you're communicating with people from all over the world, and the ability to communicate with others easily, which we just talked about that, is very important as you look at those candidates, Hispanic candidates. In a previous job, I used to communicate with people from Russia. Just our SAS, our office in Russia or Germany, we established, I was able to establish a connection first before, hey, do this for me or do that for us, or get for us that. So just having that thinking about that candidate and how they would fit into a specific role that involves that connection of different cultures is something to keep in mind.
That's
Hey,
a really,
Rocky,
go ahead, John, go
no,
ahead.
Rocky, let me add one other thing that I think is important too. In this society today where um, people are concerned about sexual harassment and people are concerned about invading people's personal space, again, don't make assumptions about Hispanics because we are touchy-feely, we are huggy, we do have very close personal space, right? So again, it's not because anybody has any interest other than being friendly, right? And so people quickly jump to a conclusion that, oh, maybe there's an interest there. There's no interest other than being a friend. And yes, we as Hispanics, however, need to be a little bit more careful on how we express ourselves because it could be misinterpreted, and that's the last thing we want, right? So I think it's a little bit of a dance, a tango, if you want to use a Hispanic dance. It's a bit of a dance to make sure that we don't cross a line, but others don't make assumptions that we are crossing the line when there's no intent to cross it.
Yeah, no, it's really hard because we want to hug everybody because that's just how our families are. They hug everyone. Our friends come over from school and they're, if my parents would just, and my extended family would just love them and just want to make them part of the family. And it is really overwhelming. It's almost like we're little kids, like, you want to be my friend? Like, this, our American society is so reserved in so many ways, again, a lot from the legalities and things, and especially in the corporate world, but it's really hard to turn it off sometimes or even temper it because you just really want to connect with people. And I also think when you do business or you're trying to recruit someone that is Latino, like, I know that there's certain things you can't ask them, but I think getting to know them with appropriate interview questions that, really relate to them on a more personal level, or what are their hobbies and, things like that, that really makes a very big difference. When you do business, in Latin America, and I was very lucky early in my career to travel throughout Latin America as a salesperson. And you really you don't cut to the chase in your business talk. You just don't. You get to know their families. You really work on your bond, and then they negotiate like 40% discount, which is another really interesting thing in business. So I imagine if you're recruiting someone, they may be stiff negotiators because that's very cultural too. But you really need to be inclusive. You have to allow that sort of warmth in relationship. And you know what? Is that a bad thing? I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's such a beautiful thing about the culture that, again, that's the beauty of diversity and inclusion, is that the best analogy I've ever heard is that it's sort of like a choir. You want everyone in the choir to show up and sing their range. So you have these beautiful harmonies. If you have everyone show up and sing the same, it wouldn't be nearly as beautiful. So to be able to have the relationship building that Latinos have to bring to a corporation is such a tremendous value add on so many different levels.
So Abigail, you mentioned a cheek kiss in the chat.
Yeah.
So I'll share a personal story. So when I got engaged to my wife, who's Singapore Chinese, I went to Peru and met the family, right? And after the first evening, she was like, what is up with this? Everybody kissed me. I don't know anybody, and yet everybody was kissing me. And I said, well, you got to understand that's the culture, and that's now she's the most loving. I mean, she's part of us, right? She's part of the culture. But if you understand the Chinese culture, that's not necessarily a huggy and kissy culture. In fact, it's the opposite. Personal space is quite far compared to the Hispanic culture. So just to see the evolution of my wife is just, it was just beautiful.
I think that's a great point, chatting through like the misalignment where between different cultures. So like Hispanic culture and American culture, yeah, there's similarities, but there's also stark differences where if someone doesn't know that much about the Hispanic culture, they might think differently about it. And we've talked about this of just like the relationship building. In Spain, we have a phrase that in Spain, we work to live, and in the US, they live to work. And a lot of times you go in and maybe like, even if you're on AM calls or if you're on calls with a candidate, it's like maybe 30 seconds of small chat, and then you go straight to business. And if you were to try and do that in Spain, like, just would not work. People would not want to work with you. It is, I want to work with you. I don't care what your business is, in a way. So it's a very different mentality to have, where my dad might take a client to lunch for an hour and a half. They might not talk about business at all, and that is totally fine. And they might have a 10-minute follow-up conversation over the phone the next day. That's boom, in 10 minutes, they figured out their business piece. And that is the most important thing when we're trying to build relationships in these communities, is like, how do we bridge that gap? How do we understand, okay, I'm over here, but you're over there. Let me come a little bit forward and you can come as well. And that way we can meet in the middle, in the, maybe we're not double kissing each other when we meet, but maybe we give each other a hug, you know? So that's just one piece of just seeing different ways that we can bridge the gap.
So Rocky, what you're talking about is cultural agility. And it is so important to have the right cultural agility, because as you start doing business in Asia, very different culture between Japan and Korea and China and Southeast Asia, very different, right? If you do business in Europe, you know, you go to the Mediterranean countries and they're very different to the Scandinavian countries, right? So, or the UK. So you really have, as you're doing business globally, you really have to understand the culture of where you're going into. And quite frankly, it's up to you. It's your responsibility to adapt to that country. It's not the responsibility of them to adapt to you. So as you're expanding globally, as you're looking at, building relationships with people of other countries, you are the one that should learn what their culture is about, and you have to make that effort. Similarly, now we're in the US, as Hispanics, we should also try, yes, we love our culture. Yes, we love who we are, but we also need to adapt. Right? We also need to adapt. We're in a country where cultural norms are slightly different. I'm not saying lose your norms, but in the business world, you need to be more culturally agile. Sorry, Cisco, if I interrupted.
No problem. Yeah, I was going to say, in my experience, it's I've had to learn to even work with people from different states here in the U.S., right? We all know the Northern, I mean, we make an assumption of Northerners and Southerners, and but yeah, you have to learn. Also from a cultural perspective too, early in my career, I remember we had a tough customer, he was the president of this company. And when he called, everybody was like ready to be there and for him and have all the answers. Well, I was a newbie, as an associate. And, I had this, we have respect for our authority. That's how I was brought up. So yeah, I had respect for this guy, but the knowledge, I had less knowledge being an associate than, him, who had used the product for many years. So all that to say is I had to adapt. And also I had other allies with me. I had a coworker who said, look, you can do it. We all, just like any English speaking native, we need a little bit of hump too. We all need help, right? And we all need encouragement. And so all that says we're all the same. We're there to do our work. So as you see these candidates, know that they're there to work and work hard.
Yeah, absolutely, great point.
But Cisco, you bring up a really good point, though, because there are aspects of our culture that could be very misinterpreted or even hold us back. So you talked about like the respect for authority. Like my dad was quite a patriarch. It was very machismo. Although interesting enough, as a girl, he treated me very equal with my brother. But he was the man of the house. And our culture kind of, I think across Latin America, I think it's fair to say, has a lot of respect for the man of the house, for elders, and where you don't question. We get to, a lot of Latinos get to the corporate worlds, and they're in situations where they should probably speak up because they have a better professional opinion. And instead, they tend to respect authority enough that in many situations won't give their own opinion. And so I do think that we all need to be aware and use inclusive communication to to make sure that we're saying, well, you know, Cisco, what do you think? You know, John, what do you think? And make sure that they're heard, because naturally it's very much inherent to our culture not to speak up in that capacity.
Yep, especially when you see the opposite here in the US, especially the stereotype of millennials is that we ask for everything. And so you have that on one end, but then you have Hispanic individuals that it's like based on their countries or the culture itself, it's not to disrespect authority or not to disrespect elders. And so you see that knock where it's like, oh, well, they didn't ask any questions in the interview, or, well, they didn't ask for a raise, or they didn't tell me that they were interested in this promotion, and all these different things that doesn't mean that they're not interested. It's just as managers or as people or as allies in the environment, let's open the door for that to get to that level of comfort. And maybe at the first part, we've got to ask more questions. Are you interested in this? Like, do you have any questions? And we've got to coach a little bit to try and meet in the middle. But having the assumption that that means that they're not interested or they don't want it at all, when that's just not in their culture or in their nature to speak up in those certain settings. That's just a way that I know there was a lot of questions around allyship. I think that's a really great point of, if you're in a meeting and you know that your Hispanic friend has a lot of great ideas, like open the door for them to be able to speak on those, because they might not do that themselves.
Hey, Rocky, I think it goes both ways, though. I think your point is absolutely spot on. I think as Caucasian leaders, we should be more aware of people that have a propensity not to speak out. Hispanics being one, Asians being others, right? So Asians also respect authority, respect, hierarchy, and will not speak out in an environment where they're not invited to speak. Having said that, I think as Hispanics, we also need to be aware that that's the perception that people have of us. And if we have a point of view, we should share it. We can share it respectfully. It doesn't, nobody's going to chop your head off, right? Just share it respectfully. Just have a little bit more presence in meetings where you can, if you have something to contribute. Don't just speak for speaking's sake, but if you have something to say, then you should say it. So I think it goes both ways.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest, challenge. There is a term called code switching
Yes.
that I'll never forget the first time a friend told me this term, because it used to be a term that was used about being bilingual and kind of going back and forth from, of languages to speak to different people. But today it's used more in the capacity of where you're a certain race or ethnicity and you're feeling that you need to adapt yourself to someone of another race or ethnicity in order to fit in. And this is something that I don't know, especially in corporate America, that we're aware of, is that a large amount of, different culture, this goes, again, it applies to different genders, to different races, to that there is always a need to adapt oneself to a norm or an ideal. And we have these ideals in our society. There's a great study done by a researcher in the UK that I read, that she asked people of many cultures to draw what a leader looked like. And almost all of them drew a picture of a white man. And in fact, if the character was more androgynous, they drew a picture of an androgynous character that had male-dominated qualities. So I think that in the corporate world, we have these biases and ideals where everyone is forced to fit into. And I think we don't realize that how uncomfortable that can be. I'll give you an example, like something like showing emotion. Being a Latino person, we're very emotional, everything. We're very, es pasiones, we have passion about everything. We play hard, we work hard, everything is intensity. Watch a telenovela, for God's sakes, right? Ay, Dios mío. But that is not well received in the corporate world. Yeah, it looks like we're unhinged. It looks like we don't have control. And it certainly doesn't look like leadership. And so, myself, being a vice president and working really hard in the corporate world, I feel like I've spent a lot of years trying to fit in and having to change. But honestly, it catches up with you because there's only so long you can fake it. Your authentic self is always going to come through. And quite frankly, your authentic self is what makes you special. And again, what should be encouraged in our employees so that we have the beautiful music in the harmony, right? But I will say I have been very challenged in that realm because I feel very misunderstood.
Yeah, Lauren, that's a great point. Especially, I was thinking about the choir as well. If we're all trying to fit into this norm that's not ourselves and not our authentic selves, then we're not going to have the beautiful voices of the choir. And so I know I have a friend who's Dominican, and she is like loud and passionate. And when she's allowed to be herself, she brings a lot of different ideas to the table and has a lot of passion for her clients. But she code switches because that's not perceived in the way. So that company is losing out on her authentic self because you've created this norm of what everyone should show up as. And if someone doesn't fit that, then they mold into you. And then maybe you brought a bunch of diverse individuals to the table, but because of your culture, we just muted everybody. So everybody is now the same, and it defeats the purpose of doing it in the first place. So I think that's why we talk about a lot of like diversity and inclusion. They come hand in hand. You can't have diversity without inclusion. You can't have diversity without actually allowing people to show up as their authentic selves in the workplace. So I appreciate you bringing that point up.
Yeah, I mean, how you create innovation is listening to the voices of many of the differing opinions. And there's a million studies that show, but you can't, to your point, you can't hire to a diverse group and then not allow them to have a voice. And that we need to change. And the only way that we can change is again, that agility that John describes.
Yeah.
I also like to think about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. So I love the word belonging, right? Mm-hmm. So the word belonging means I belong to TSG. I belong to the culture of TSG, right? You want everybody to feel comfortable showing up the way they are, and they feel like they belong to that culture, to the culture of your employer, right? If you every time you interact with different people, different cultures, if you just take 5 seconds and think about putting yourself in their shoes, I think the way you show up will be different. I call it other person's point of view. In short, OPOV. Think OPOV every time you interact with somebody.
I love that.
I was going to say, we have George Caracantis. I think I'm mispronounced your name, but even he in your website, talks about that's why TSG is committed to cultivating a company culture where everyone feels like they belong. And that's what, we were just talking about. And I just think, when you're looking at this candidate, think about what we've discussed, and also talk with that manager that you're connecting this to people together, and just maybe help them understand who this person is. They may not communicate well, but they got the knowledge that they need, depending on their role, right? So it's that getting that vision of the potential of that person you're recruiting, and understanding both sides and kind of connecting them, which is your job, right?
Yeah, I love that. One thing that I do for a living is I brand companies, and to me, brand and culture are synonymous. The best brands at their core are their belief system, and which feeds into John's comment about belonging, is that you share a belief as a company internally, and you seek out customers that believe what you believe. It's essentially the definition of what your why is. If you know Simon Sinek, which I use his golden circle a lot for how I brand companies. And so really your culture and your belief system is the core in how you attract the right individuals who believe. And those people who share those beliefs are across cultures, races, genders, disability, etc. And so, yeah, to me, I see brand and culture synonymous.
Absolutely. I love that point.
Mhm.
And the last point on code switching is it was funny, we were talking about this on our first call all together, and we were thinking of different ways. And I was like, even just look at the way that we've changed our names. Like my name is Raquel Lozano Hazlett and I go by Rocky Hazlett. It's very different. And Lauren, I know we talked about that too. Like you
Yeah.
could go for Lorena, but it's just easier for you to function in the US by changing your name and making it a little bit more consumable.
When I was born in Spain, my parents spelled my name Loren versus Lauren like they do in the States, so that my name could be pronounced the same in English and Spanish. And it's so funny because everyone spells it wrong, but I'm just used to it or immune to it or forget. But that's exactly why. And it's so much a part of me now. And I do love the way it's spelled, differently. But yes, often my father's name was Adolfo, and we would go to a restaurant and he would say, he put his name down. He said his name was Al. And we would laugh. We're like, who's this Al guy? But you do have to adapt. You do feel like you're forced to adapt because people won't be as open to that. It's just different or hard to pronounce or hard to spell.
Yeah, absolutely. Cisco, I wanted to go to you because you had a great point on how a company can create a better culture of inclusivity, even from the first week, like the onboarding. I specifically was thinking about like TSG. We have all these unofficial processes and things that we do and things that are common and normal for people that have been here, but it's almost like a learn as you go. Oh, that's how we do things around here. And so you had a good point of how we can help with like, what are the communication channels and different ways that we can help somebody from the day that they start and start with that inclusivity.
Yeah. So, one of the things is, again, we discussed different aspects of respect but coming alongside and maybe setting up recurring meetings at the beginning and in the onboarding process. So every 2 weeks or every week, maybe I start with that, then expands down into every 2 weeks, maybe once a month or then as needed. Also, again, just connecting, understanding more about the culture, reviewing the points that we've discussed would be a good way for someone who's taking that onboarding with someone that's new.
Absolutely. Thank you for that point. Now I want to, before I open it up to questions, I want to wrap it up. As we all hopped on this call, I saw big smiles from each of us as we were talking about things that we're proud of. And I know as Hispanic and Latino individuals, we are very proud people. So I wanted everyone to share their favorite part of being Hispanic or Latino and ways that we celebrate our culture. Cisco, you want to kick us off?
Well, the thought that first come to mind is the relationship part of it. First being here in the States, as was been shared before, there's so much richness in this country. I've enjoyed being Hispanic. I can relate to both. And my wife was born here, so and my kids also. So not only to relate to people from natives here, but also relating to other Hispanics in just to have that they're the same, right? And just I appreciate that feeling of being relational.
Absolutely. That was honestly mine as well. I think one of my favorite parts is just the love. And I'll be going somewhere with my dad and in the US and we run into someone that's from Peru, and it's like you just automatically strike up a 10-15 minute conversation with them, and it's like they're part of your family already, regardless of whether you've met them before or anything. It's like we seem to find each other, and some music plays and you look across the room and you see who's singing all the lyrics to it or whatever it may be. It's just that blood that runs through our veins, that we just have that connection together regardless of what country you're from. And of course, as we talked about, so many different countries and so many different cultures that come together, but so many different similarities that really do cause us to feel like family when we meet each other outside of our settings. So that's my favorite part.
So Rocky, that's so funny because that's what I was going to share. So as I shared earlier, my kids are half Asian, half Hispanic, and when they were young, they would always cringe when I would talk to anybody, right? I mean, I just like to talk to people, and they were like, "Oh, Dad, why are you doing this again?" And my oldest is now 19, my second one is 16, and they're doing it, and it's so beautiful.
I have to say, I was the same way. I was the one cringing when I was young, and then now I'm the one doing
And here you are.
I was thinking the same thing because it's so embarrassing, but we live to embarrass our kids. I know I have a 13-year-old daughter, but I think the reason why you feel that way when you meet someone else is Latino, because you're like, oh, I can be myself. I can, there's like again, this code of conduct that you just understand of like what it means. But I think this is such a hard question for me to answer, but I think also the loyalty, like my family just and my Latino friends and have such a loyalty of what it truly means to be a friend. And I think we're losing that so much in this country. And I think through social media and other things, the friends and acquaintances have completely different definitions, I think, than what it means, to a Latino family. And I love the loudness and the passion,
Yeah.
and the dancing, and just the, again, working to live. I think that is such a beautiful sentiment. The American dream to us has always been like that you live to work. And I think Latinos have their head on straight, a little bit of what the purpose of working is for. It's to enjoy our families and to really spend time and enjoy life with our friends.
Absolutely. I love that piece. Well, I want to open it up to everybody. Oh, yes. John, go for it.
Oh, no. So one of the conversations we had in the pre-call was that, Hispanics get a rap for taking a job because it's offered to them. So in other words, we have a hard time saying no, right? Because that's the culture that we're in. And so one thing that I want to encourage all of you as you think about your careers, and I often talk to people, in public forums, who likes to do road trips here? Most people like to do a road trip, right? And so when you do a road trip, do you just jump in your car and go? Unlikely. You're going to select your final destination. You're going to say, okay, do I want to go on the freeway? Do I want to go on the scenic route? Which way do I want to go? How many stops do I want to make, etc. Right? Your career is the same. Don't just take a job because somebody said, hey, this is going to be a good opportunity. Go for it. Have a plan. And this applies to everybody, not just Hispanics, but everybody. What is your final destination? Where you want to go? Do you want to be head of a function? Do you want to be head of a department? Do you just want to be an individual contributor? All of those are fine, but have a plan for where you want to go. And as Hispanics, we fight that perception that we'll do anything, right? Oh, just offer it to John, he'll do it. Well, is it helping me get to my final destination? And if it isn't, then ask the question, why should I be doing that? And again, that applies to everybody, not just Hispanics. But we do have a rap of, taking whatever is given to us just because they're giving it to us.
Absolutely. And thank you for stepping in and adding that additional point. Definitely a good one.